Joining us now, Congressman, 1st District Republican, Doctor, PhD, all that good stuff. Soon to be, we hope, chairman of the all-influential Sea Power Committee. Also, second, according to the Quinnipiac poll, Rob Wittman, right in the middle, right in the hunt in the governor's race with 10%, but he's not in the race. He's second, but he's not even in the race. Imagine if he was in it. What'd he be like in first place? The Quinnipiac poll comes out, has the Republican side, Ed Gillespie, 24%, Rob Wittman, who dropped out, 10%, and Frank Wagner and Corey Stewart tied at 4%, and Wittman dropped out, and the only statewide exposure he's got is on my show. So I'll take full credit for the 10%. Hey, we're not shy about taking credit. Anything good happens, it's because of us. Anything bad happens, it's somebody else, right? That's a John Fredericks Show right now. With the buck stops here. But Rob Wittman, in second place in a race that he's not in, is now joining us. Congressman Dr. Wittman, good to have you with us.
Good morning, John. It's great to be with you.
I can't stop laughing. So we got this poll yesterday, and it was me, Chris Saxman, Aaron, who else? Emily Plur was there, the Republican Roundtable, Andrew Vehorn, right? All your friends, Krause, Senator Stanley, and like we're looking at this Quinnipiac poll for the governor's race, and you're like 10, you're in second place and 10% and closing, and you dropped out of the race. So thought you might find that interesting. Imagine if you had stayed in it, right?
Well, John, as you know, a very, very tough decision, but with all the things going on and with there only being a single member as we speak from Virginia on the House Armed Services Committee, and with that committee being so critical for what President-elect Trump wants to do in rebuilding our military and the importance that it has for Virginia, you know, I really looked at it very carefully and felt like the best place for me to serve Virginia right now is there on the Armed Services Committee, hopefully in a leadership position. And, you know, there's plenty of time out there. I tell folks, you know, before you know it, 4 years will go past, and it'll be the next gubernatorial election will be on our doorstep. So we are going to get in there and work hard for Virginia, and then make sure that whoever gets our party's nomination for governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general, that we win those races in 2017, and then it's onward from there.
Onward from there. Okay, Dr. Wittman, let's go rapid fire here now that we've got you on. I know we got a lot to talk about. Let's start with a couple of Donald Trump's cabinet selections. Rex Tillerson, Exxon CEO, no government experience. What say you?
Listen, I like Rex Tillerson. I like the experience that he brings. I like the scope of his ideas about what I believe need to happen in our foreign policy. You know, he's dealt with over 50 countries as chairman and CEO of ExxonMobil. That type of experience, I think, is critical because obviously our foreign policy over the past 8 years has been a failure. All you need to do is to look and see what's going on in Syria and the human tragedy there in Aleppo and know that we've got to do something different. You know, an individual that has relationships, that knows how to work with leaders in those other countries, I think is critical. I think it's a great set of tools to bring to the table. It is different than some of the previous secretaries of state, but I think at this time a refreshing change, because I think it's fairly obvious that, you know, having the same cookie cutter type of Secretary of State, someone that's, you know, served in Congress for many, many years, has a single viewpoint of the world. I think having Rex Tillerson in there with his viewpoint, not only from a business perspective, but how he has to work with world leaders to get things done, I think is refreshing. And I do believe, John, that when he has the opportunity to sit down and meet individually with senators there and talk to them, and for them to understand who he is and what he brings to the table, I think it'll be very compelling for each of those senators in looking at confirming him and knowing that Rex Tillerson brings a tremendous amount to the job.
Look, Dr. Wittman, so you got your typical neocons out there, warmongers, right? John McCain, Lindsey Graham. I know they're your buds. They're threatening to hold up Tillerson because of his ties to Russia. But isn't this exactly what Trump said? I mean, the thing is, Trump is doing everything he said he was going to do, right? Elections have consequences. He said he was going to try to get us out of these wars. He was not interested in regime changes, and he was going to look for cooperation with Russia and other countries where we could have strategic alliance with that are not threatening our sovereignty the way China is with currency manipulation, dumping steel, dumping aluminum, things like that. So, I mean, what, McCain, Graham threatening to hold this up? I mean, what do you make of this whole thing? Did they not get the memo?
I look at it from this standpoint. I think we need somebody in there that shows and they can be effective in dealing with Russia. And then Mr. Trump and his Secretary of State, hopefully being Rex Tillerson, and the rest of his cabinet and advisors will determine what's the U.S. policy going forward. But, really, Rex Tillerson will be the implementer of that policy. So I think having somebody in there that shows experience so they can effectively deal with Russia, that they can get Russia to do the things that are necessary, is exactly what you want. Obviously, his role in dealing with Russia as chairman of ExxonMobil is going to be very different than it would be with him as Secretary of State. I think that he can easily separate those two. And just because, he has a good working relationship with Vladimir Putin doesn't necessarily mean that he is going to be sympathetic to how Russia operates, nor that he can't be assertive and get Russia to do the things that they need to do. And I think a great public policy place that you can point to today is obviously Russia's role there in Syria. I mean, this administration has utterly failed there in Syria, and because of that, Russia has jumped in, and now the things that Russia is doing on behalf of the Assad government there is absolutely unacceptable. Status quo isn't getting it done. The current Secretary of State that served time in the Senate obviously hasn't been effective there. To me, having somebody else that brings a different perspective has shown that they can be effective in dealing with Putin, I think brings a large amount of leverage to the table. So I don't necessarily believe, as some others do, that just because he's worked with Putin and he shows a relationship with Putin, that's a bad thing. In fact, I think that he can leverage that into a good thing and really be effective for American public policy.
I agree with you 100%, and hopefully he can get through the hearings. But I don't think Senator McCain or Senator Graham got the memo. I just don't think these people even know what happened. It's amazing to me that, Congressman, the number of people I talk to that really still don't grasp what this election was about is dumbfounding. And I talk to intelligent people. They don't grasp it. They don't understand what the movement is. They don't understand why Trump won. And they go back to racism or some of this other nonsense or some kind of, white lash, all this crap. It's got nothing to do with that. It's about getting out of these wars and getting jobs and getting our sovereignty back. I mean, it's as simple as that. They just cannot figure it out. Let's get to Aleppo. Now we send another 200 American soldiers in there as advisors. No declaration of war. This is a disaster now, what's going on in there. I mean, one hand, from a humanitarian standpoint, you look at what's happening in the city and you want to cry, right? No question. On the other hand, I mean, this is a civil war. Civil wars have been happening since Christ, right? So they happen. Why are we involved in it? What do we do? What are your thoughts here?
Well, what's going on with civilians in Aleppo is really a human tragedy, and we've seen that in other times, such as the genocide that happened in Bosnia.
Right.
I think what we can do here, John, is to be able to work with others, not to interject ourselves in directly with the conflict between Bashar Assad's forces, Russian allies there at their side against the rebels, but at the very least what we can do is to create some safe zones, at least be able to allow these civilians to get out of harm's way. And we ought to have countries like Turkey to be there as a direct assist. I had an opportunity to visit the Syrian refugee camps in Turkey, and they had done a tremendous job there to provide refuge and support for those folks that are fleeing Syria. There has to be, I believe, a greater involvement of United States, Turkey, and really other allies in the region, including other Arab nations, on the humanitarian front, not necessarily on the strategic front and what happens there, But what are we going to do immediately just for the human tragedy that's happening there? I think that's the thing that has to be addressed initially. At least, provide for some safe zones for these folks to be able to get to be able to get out of harm's way. Because right now they're in the crossfire, and it seems like nobody really cares about the human tragedy of this. To me, that's the big deal. For us to get directly involved in that conflict, there is a no-win situation. It is not the way, I think, for there to be long-term success. And remember, if we did, let's play this out. Let's say America does get involved. Let's say that perchance we are on the side of the rebels win, and then what happens? The Russians are not going to allow Bashar Assad to be displaced. So then we're going to be right back in the same situation we were in places like Iraq, where we are today with Afghanistan, and that is, how do you put in sustainable governance after you provide security? So there has to be a broader view of this. I think a lot of the folks like General James Mattis, who obviously was the CENTCOM commander, so this was right in his bailiwick, I think have some pretty good ideas about what you can do to go in strategically and play a role here to hopefully, at least bring this conflict down. I think some of the ideas like at least no-fly zones and tell the Russians, hey, listen, we are not going to allow you to fly operations in here where you're bombing civilians there in Aleppo. At least take that pressure off to be able to do those things. That doesn't get us directly involved on the ground, but at least it provides a little bit of respite for what's going on there and a chance in that situation, a chance for there to be some kind of resolution to this. But, remember, the easy thing to do is to displace the rebels. Look at what happened in Libya. We went in, displaced Gaddafi, and what do you have right there now? You have chaos, you have lack of governance. I mean, those things, I argue, are worse than the situations that originally occurred. And this whole idea of Arab Spring, when we saw many leaders there displaced, I don't believe that you can say today that those Middle Eastern and Northern African countries in that region of the area is safer today because of the Arab Spring and the displacement of the leaders, problematic as some of them were, than where we are today. So again, failed United States foreign policy, we've got to do something different.
I tell you what, I agree with exactly what you're saying. You could be the spokesperson for President-elect Trump's entire foreign policy vision because you just articulated it brilliantly. And I agree with you on Syria 100%. I mean, our involvement there should be humanitarian aid. We need to stay out of that thing. I mean, it's a civil war. I mean, President Bashar has a right to try to take his country back from the rebels. I mean, I don't know how you blame anybody for what's gone on in there other than us who went in and armed people that we didn't even know who the hell they were. The whole thing is such a mess, and we just need to stay out of it. These civil wars are going to continue to go on, and this is Russia's ally, and Russia has a right to defend their ally, just like we have a right to defend our strategic allies, of which we have no strategic allegiance with rebels, Syria, Assad, none of them. So the whole thing is absolutely ridiculous, and you're spot on with that. Okay, let's get to your pending chairmanship of the House Armed Services Sea Power and Projection Forces Subcommittee. Now, this is a key slot on the House Armed Services Committee, and it would give you the jurisdiction of the sea power. The committee includes the Navy, Marine Corps Research, Development, and Acquisition Programs, Naval Reserve, Air Force. Did I leave anything out?
No, that's it. It essentially provides us the ability to oversee and to direct through congressional authority our United States Navy, Marine Corps, and the projection force capability within our Air Force, which is most of what happens in the Air Force.
All right. So when is this decision going to be announced?
Well, we get sworn in on January the 3rd. Obviously, we want to hit the ground running on January the 4th. So it's my understanding that the Speaker will make announcements on what's called populating the committees, and that is where people are assigned to committees. And the subcommittee chairman, after the formal swearing-in ceremonies there on the 3rd. So I would imagine it would either be that evening or on the 4th. I don't imagine you'd want to delay it because there's so many things to do. You'd want your committees to be out there and to be put in place by that time. So I would imagine, John, it would be late January 3rd or early January the 4th.
Now, assuming you get this chairmanship, Dr. Wittman, which is going to be critical, a lot of people have been critical of the declination of our naval forces, basically that we don't have enough ships. I know I had Randy Forbes on my show many times who was very upset by the fact that we were falling woefully behind the Chinese as far as attack submarines of a certain size, and that they had a 2.5 to 1 advantage over us in the Pacific Rim as far as subs out there. And Trump, one thing he said, look, I want to start these wars. I don't want to be toppling regimes. I'm going to get the CIA out of that business. But look, I want to rebuild the military peace through strength. I'm sure when you guys meet with his advisors, DOD, and say, look, the Chinese have, 2.5 times the subs we have in this area. I mean, how are you going to deal with some of the declination that we've got right now as far as the Navy, ships, and subs? How are you going to work that angle?
Well, John, I do believe that we need to rebuild our Navy. I do think the 350 number is a good number. If you look at the U.S. Navy force assessment that's actually going to come out shortly, it looks at that, and one of the projection points of the discussion has been a 350 ship Navy. I think that's where we need to be. We can actually do that over a 30-year period with an additional roughly $5 billion a year in $5 to $6 billion a year investment in our shipbuilding budgets. I think that's realistic. I think you can take existing shipbuilding programs, the Virginia-class submarine program, the new Columbia-class, or what's been termed previously Ohio-class replacement, our Ford-class aircraft carriers, our DDG-51 destroyers, our new LXR amphibious ships. All those are hot lines. They're developed hulls. You don't have to start new programs. You could easily take those and ramp those up, enhance your maintenance programs for existing ships to make sure they last the full expected time. And I think you can put yourself on a reasonable and sustainable track to build that 350-ship Army. And you bring up a great point. The best foreign policy that we can have is to have a strong national defense policy. The best national defense policy for us to have is presence around the world. The days of U.S. bases in these other countries is done. That's not going to happen anymore. The way we influence events and make sure that people behave properly is to have presence. There's nothing quite like an aircraft carrier being in the region to get people to think twice, whether it's North Korea, whether it's China or others. That projection of power through naval presence, I think, is one of the most critical things we can do to make sure, just as President-elect Trump says, to make sure we have a peaceful world. It's peace through strength, which is the Reagan adage. You have that strength there. You can influence events. You can make sure that people don't act badly, and you can influence events before they spiral out of control. If you don't have presence there, then people have a tendency, like you would expect, to misbehave, to look at it and go, well, nothing's going to happen. There'll be no consequences to my behavior because the U.S. doesn't have the capability to back up what they say they will do if we act badly. That's why a strong United States Navy and a strong amphibious presence to make sure we can project forces where we need to is critical. And I'm excited about what this administration wants to do and what I believe we can do through the Sea Power and Projection of Forces Subcommittee on House Armed Services to help in that effort to rebuild our United States Navy.
I have to take off just so I don't have to look it up. How many ships do we have now?
We're at 272 right now.
Right. So you want to get to 350. We're out of time. Merry Christmas, Dr. Wittman. Good to have you with us today. My best to your family, your lovely wife, Catherine. I know you'll enjoy the holidays, and we thank you, Dr. Wittman, for all you do for us and our listeners. Thank you so much. Merry Christmas.